Record to the cloud. Slideshow from the beginning. All right. I had to kind of not record that. If I record stuff on Zoom, even though it's a commercial, they'll kick it back and say, this is copyrighted material, you can't post this video. That's why I showed it to you first, but whoever made that ad figured that you must know who Cleopatra was, right? Does it make sense without, they give you some hints. They see that she's being carried on a throne. You see them go past the pyramids at Giza. You see that it's a desert. Cleopatra. So, what we're getting into now, we looked at the Mesopotamian, and we'll see that the Egyptians actually borrowed quite a lot from Mesopotamian art. But right now, we're getting onto that continuous line that is Western civilization. So, anybody got some more? I brought in my Amazon lane commercial. Anything else that's connected to today that comes from Egyptian stuff? Nothing? How many of you like money? I like money. See the back of a $1 bill? They have a pyramid, just like the pyramids at Giza, but with the top portion coming off and an all-seeing eye. That pyramid's right out of Egypt. That's where they invented that thing. How about the Washington Monument? You guys know what the Washington Monument is? What it looks like? What does it look like? A giant tower with a triangle on top. Beautiful. Absolutely. And at one time, it was the tallest building in the Americas. 150 some years ago. That's out of Egypt too. It's called an obelisk. And it's a thing that we find in ancient Egypt. Tall, narrow structure, pyramid on top. When they found them, when at least the direct descendants, we know Europeans came in there in the late 18th century, they found these things all over the place, these obelisks. They call them Cleopatra's needles, by the way, because they kind of are shaped like needles. And so there's a lot of stuff, at least in terms of symbols and architecture, that we get right out of Egypt. And as we go through this, you'll see there are some other things that may be a little more nuanced, but go back to Egypt. Judgment of Hunefer, detail of illustrated Book of the Dead. We talked about this. Here's Hunefer's heart. There is a feather. If his heart was lighter than the feather, he would get passage into an afterlife. Well, this is really kind of interesting, the belief in an afterlife. And there are some people in this world, as we speak, that vehemently deny that there is such a thing as an afterlife. But most of us most of the religions of the world, East and West, talk about life after death. And many of them have this kind of judgment thing going on, that if you're good, you go to heaven or you go to paradise. If you're bad, well, let's try again. See you later. So anyway, there's a lot of stuff that comes right out of Egypt. And so these, I want to kind of talk to you about something here. We got in Egypt a culture that really lasts about almost like 3,000 years or more. And so what we have here is what we call a pre-dynastic time, and that's 3,500 to 2,500, roughly BCE. And that is where Egypt was there, not particularly organized as well, but it was there. The culture was thriving. And so that's what this means here, pre-dynastic. And so one culture replaced the other. But then we get to the Old Kingdom, and that's roughly about 2575 BCE. And that's where Egypt became organized. And as they organized, they actually, their government was organized, their religion was organized, everything, military, everything. They functioned like an empire. And the empire spanned the Nile River from what is modern day northern Sudan all the way up to the Mediterranean. So it's a big parcel of land. It was a very big kingdom. And so this is one of the earliest pre-dynastic artifacts we have, and it's called Narmer's palette. And this palette, I'll show you, this is the back. And what makes this so interesting is that it takes a lot of the artistic cues right out of Mesopotamian art, but it's uniquely Egyptian as well. And so we see some of the kinds of things. We start to see the Egyptian beard. We start to see Egyptian writing. We start to see a lot of signs and symbols. And this is the front. I talked about this being a palette. Anybody know what a palette is? How many painters do we have here? You know what a palette is. You get a palette knife, you know, and you mix your colors.
I thought like in the history kind of term palette. It's like when I think of palette, that's like looking at the picture. Side.
Yeah.
The front side to back side. That's what I thought. But yeah, a palette's just absolutely.
Absolutely. And you're right. And here's the central part. And this was a palette we believe was used to mix colors just like you do with your palette in painting, but for makeup purposes. And so it's King Narmer's palette, and this is where they would make the makeup. And so makeup, whoa, that's another thing. Comes from ancient times, ancient civilization. It's not Revlon. It's like Egyptian. Anyway, we start to see all of these signs and symbols, and we see there are three main registers or friezes here. And we see here, I'm trying to, I don't have a good view of it. Here we go. And there's the top, there's the middle, and we have these lions with long necks and they're facing off with each other, and the lion keepers right there. And then on the bottom, we have the bull. We have here on the top and on the bottom to some extent, hierarchy of scale. We've seen that already. And so who's the most important person on this frieze? He's top, he's not dead center, but you can just about guess this is King Narmer. And you can see the servants. And these figures over here is a little bit some difference of opinion, but these may be vanquished enemy. But bottom line is that this is pre-dynastic. And so we go right from there and we start to see in the Old Kingdom, they start to organize. These are the mastaba tombs. And they were built, and they're kind of like some of the stuff we saw in Mesopotamia, those buildings with sloped sides and a flat roof. But these are tombs, and this is where you would bury the important people. And so we have a chapel, we have a false door. Oops. We have a statue of the deceased, and we have down here the burial chamber. And so this was pretty elaborate, but the idea that we were marking the passing of great people, we can tell usually when we find these bodies, when we find the mummies, we can usually tell with some accuracy who they actually were. We don't find much of that in Mesopotamia. And this is Imhotep, and this is Old Kingdom, 3rd dynasty. And so what is a dynasty? It's where a king rules the country. And then when that king and his spouse, whoever, ascends to the throne, then we get a new dynasty. And so these dynasties last, on the average, like about 50 years. And so this is a step pyramid, and it is basically this, but one stacked upon the other. And it's a step pyramid. They used it for burial, and you can see the sand built up on it. You can see the bricks are gone. But this is the 3rd dynasty. So we're really kind of early in the dynastic period. It's called the Old Kingdom. And so we think that what this looked like in its original form was this. This is a drawing, restored view of the mortuary precinct of Dosher, Saqqara, Egypt, 3rd dynasty. And so in the middle of it all, that step pyramid, and all the rest is around there. We don't know. We're just speculating. One of the things that happens in ancient Egypt is that the desert actually reclaims parts of what was Egyptian architecture and monuments and so on. There are some monuments that we've uncovered in the last 100 years that people really didn't know existed, because over the millennia, the desert blowing sand in from the Sahara actually buries a lot of this. And so this is still the third dynasty. You can see they're doing columns and the mortuary precinct at Saqqara. And that is part of this. So we got pieces of it. We're uncovering more all the time. And so there's some more. The North Palace, mortuary precinct, and this is where the kings, at least from the Old Kingdom, were buried. And so now we kind of, within a few years, you see this is 2490 BCE to 2472. So this is really not that. So this is 2630. And this is 2490. So within 100 years, or 150 years, I should say, we go from the ancient step pyramids, and this is the fourth dynasty. Residence was the third. It's important. Aerial view of the pyramids at Giza. And so we know who they were built for. Khafre, Men, Carrier, and Khufu. You guys have seen this. You guys have seen it all over the place. It's still one of the major architectural accomplishments in the history of the world. So, I'm going to shift gears a little bit. Why do you guys like watch stuff like the History Channel, Science Channel, A&E, stuff like that? How many times do you see stuff about Egypt? On those, yeah, a little bit. I don't watch that stuff. I just eat it up. Of course, my uncle helped build it, so I'm pretty old. Just say, bottom line is that I said this early in the class, where there is a hole in the knowledge that we have about anything, but especially about ancient civilizations, where there's a hole in the knowledge, where there are some things unexplained, people will come in with theories to explain. So if you watch this kind of stuff, you go online and get this too. There will be a lot of people that tell you aliens built these. That you're shaking your head back there. And Gavin, is that your last name or first? Okay, good. I'm trying to find my names here, but I'm trying to get to know you guys. So, Gavin, you're shaking your head. You've seen this kind of stuff. And why would they say that? Partly, I think, because there's a hole in the knowledge. They for a long time didn't know how in the heck ancient people could build something with such mathematical precision. And we believe that they looked a lot different when they were built. And we think that they looked a little bit more like the top part here and less like the bottom part. We believe that they were polished limestone. And it doesn't really say what they're made of here, but we think they were shiny and smooth. And what has happened over the years is that, as I said, the desert reclaims things. Actually, sometimes people reclaim things too. And if you're going to build a house or something and you don't have enough bricks, just pick a few off the pyramids and build your house. That's how it was done, and over the centuries. And so one of the seven ancient wonders of the world. And here is kind of a diagram. And this is kind of what we know so far. We see there's a lot of tunnels, and there are these, like this here, air shafts, and you see that's in with question mark. There are some people, ancient alien theorists, that talk about how these air shafts actually in a certain times of the year point to particular stars. You can see them here. We don't know. They have false chambers. The entrance there is right at number 3, but once you go in, it's very easy to get lost, it's very dark, and they were meant not to be disturbed. And so over the years, they were. And see number 2, that thieves' tunnels. There have been people that actually dug their way into here and get into the king's chamber and the so-called queen's chamber. So that would be 5 and 6. But they came in through there. They dug this number. Yeah. Anyway, we know it's been robbed. That's what happens. What happens in over millennia. But magnificent, nevertheless. And you can go there, and you can actually. I've never been there, but I know some people, and you can actually go inside parts of the pyramids. They're hot, they're dark, but it's amazing. And so here is what the original complex we think looked like. And there's another ancient theory that said that these stars resemble a particular cluster of stars, a constellation that's supposed to be alien significant. Anyway, bottom line, this is what it looked like. And they've dug up enough to actually know this was probably like this. And so we got the pyramids, and it's part of this that's a recent discovery. And that is, and it's been portrayed in novels, in history books, in movies, and so on, that these pyramids were built by slaves. Don't believe me, you can watch like the 10 Commandments, for example. You'll see the Egyptians employing slaves to build their pyramids and stuff. What we're finding out today is that there probably were no slaves involved in creating pyramids. So what did they have? They had paid workers. They had contractors. They're finding actually some records of how these workers were paid. And outside of this, they're finding evidence of workers' quarters and their pots, their utensils for cooking, and so on. It looks as though they moved their whole families there to work on the pyramids. And they figured out that actually one of the perks of being a worker, building the temples, was that you got beer. They had grain. They had to know how they made beer, and they paid the workers. I don't think it was Budweiser. Bottom line is that this points to a much more compassionate and a much more civilized society than what was previously known. We thought they'd go capture people and work them to death. Didn't happen. At least not here, at least not at this time. 5, the Great Sphinx. And here is the Great Sphinx with the Pyramid of Khafre in the background. And it's sandstone and it's 65 feet high, and it is like we were talking about. We got a head of a person and a body of a lion. And we're still not exactly sure what this is and who this is, but we figured that this was a guardian of the tombs. And as you can see here, these are tourists here. This is one of the major tourist attractions in the entire world. It's magnificent. What they found too, and you can see the scale here, these are people. This is how big the Sphinx is. What we're finding is that there's much underneath the Sphinx as we know it today. And they're still trying to figure out what is there. 100 years ago, the sand basically went up to about here. We didn't know about any of the rest of it. We just saw the back, part of the back and the head popping out of the desert. And so another old kingdom, this is Khafre, the guy who was buried in the largest of the pyramids. And what we see here, this is kind of an interesting thing, is that it's got a pretty high degree of naturalism. See the muscles, see the feet. In a lot of ways, it's got its symbolism, to be sure. The headdress and the beard, the royal beard. Not like Mesopotamia where it was all braided, but a single cylindrical beard with adornment. And so this is the pharaoh. This is the guy. And then we jump right from the 3rd, 4th, and 5th dynasties to the 18th dynasty, which is really the Middle Kingdom. Excuse me. That's actually the New Kingdom, the 18th. I have to keep this all straight. I don't really expect you guys to have memorized all of the dynasties. You'll run across them if you do your research on this. I just want you to know what they mean and how to contextualize that. Sculptors at work. These are guys actually making a statue, the funerary chapel of Reckmeyer in Thebes. Whoa. Oh, back up a little bit. Now that's in Giza. In Giza, Saqqara. We're getting there. And this Thebes, right here. Giza, all the way up here. So that's what I want you to know about Egypt, is that particular dynasties that in some cases just picked up their capital and moved it to a different spot on the Nile. And so right here is, I believe, where they found the Narmer Palette, Thebes, pyramids, and Saqqara up here by Giza. So it kind of goes back and forth, and you can see many different spots along the Nile. And that's from Thebes. And so my point being this is a massive dynasty, lasted thousands of years. It's unprecedented in human history. And these are back from Giza. This is the fourth dynasty. We're going back a little bit. And Egyptian sculpture. And what we find here is this kind of way that people are portrayed. And what we find here, at least from the Old Kingdom, almost all the statues are of pharaohs, kings, if you will. And this is fourth dynasty, and seated statues of Rahotep and Nurfret, husband and wife, king, and his queen, his spouse. What's different about this? I would say that it's in color. And what we believe is that a lot of statues from antiquity were painted in this way. And it made them look much more natural. In some cases, paint is completely gone. But every once in a while, they'll find something that's, like 4,500 years old, and find them in this pristine condition. And so painted statues, and this is from the early days, the fourth dynasty. And here's another guy that's really kind of interesting. He was from Saqqara, and he's not a king. He's a scribe. He's somebody that actually works for the king, is part of the king's court. And this is a level of naturalism that actually we haven't seen before. There's some kind of thing going on with the sculptures, like a braided beard or big eyes or huge scale. This is an ordinary person painted. Again, like I say, the idea of painting sculpture, it's an Egyptian thing, probably goes back before that, but statue of Henry Rule. And this is all old. And the fifth dynasty, excuse me, this is kind of an interesting thing. Ty watching the hippopotamus hunt, and just like we saw the lion hunt in Mesopotamia, we see same thing kind of going on here. And the hippopotamus is there in the water. You see all the fish. The Egyptians ended up creating a style where we could actually follow what was going on, what they were trying to depict. Goats treading seed and cattle a canal. And so there we go. There's the goats. There's the cattle. And see this stuff down here? That's water, a canal. They had canals just like today. They used canals for irrigation. They were very advanced. And so we're moving up here. This is the 12th dynasty. You see where this is at? This is in the Nelson Museum. What we have on top here, becomes a royal symbol in Egypt. You see what that is? That's an asp. It's a snake. And that usually accompanies is part of the headdress. And so anyway, this is royalty, is Senusret III. Tomb of, here's what happens to you as we get new. They stop building the pyramids and they start carving stuff out of what the book calls live rock. Live rock means just that. It's not that it's alive, but it's rock that's remained undisturbed. And they just carve out of the rock. In Egypt, there's plenty of that. And so Numen Hotep II, 12th dynasty, they start carving this out. And these columns are carved out of the rock. And so they start burying their kings, not building pyramids, but carving into the rock. And here's an interior of a rock cut tomb. You can see it's quite elaborate, it's painted, it's actually quite nice. And here is Mortuary Temple of Hatshepsut. This is in what they call the Valley of the Kings. And you can see this again is all cut out of what they call live rock. And you can see this is not just for one king, but actually many, many different kings over time. And there's something about this. I always think about this when you see how those columns are evenly spaced and it's long. It kind of looks like a lot of architecture that you'll find in modern times. As a matter of fact, this whole thing kind of looks like it inspired much modern architecture. And so I'm going to jump the facade of the tomb of Ramses II, 19th dynasty. We're moving on. We're pretty far along. And again, cut these magnificent statues. It's 65 feet high, colossal statues carved out of rock. And there's the tomb. And here's the interior. Again, carved out of what they call live rock. And I'm really trying to get to this. I'm going to back up, but I really want to talk about this guy here. Akhenaten, colossal statue from Aten, Karnak. And one of those kings that actually picked it up and moved south was this guy, Akhenaten. And the reason he's so important is that, well, he kind of changed forever Egyptian culture. and he was the father of King Tut. And so when we found all of this stuff, when all of this stuff was uncovered in the early 20th century, and we kind of were able to put together a lot of pieces of at least the New Kingdom. And so here he is. It's 13 feet high. There's been a lot said about this. Much discussion, much analysis. One is the body shape. What would people say about the shape of Akhenaten's body?
Feminine.
Yes, absolutely. An hourglass figure, absolutely. And so we're still trying to figure this out. Was that something that the artist did to kind of say something about perhaps this is what we do today? We actually start to go into gender studies when we look at ancient things. And maybe this was something about Akhenaten's sexuality. May have had something to do with his physical appearance. There are people from time to time that show characteristics of both men and women's bodies. And so we don't really know, but it's kind of an interesting thing to think about. And this is his wife. We actually know who did this, a guy named Thutmose. Bust of Nefertiti, that's his wife, King Tut's mom. And one of the eyes is gone, but this is like, for a lot of people, and you'll find this, people say that the Egyptians had set the standard for feminine beauty with this statue. It's got a lot of feminine characteristics, the long neck, beautiful face, eyes, makeup, everything. And so, so that was his mom. And here he is, Tutankhamun. Boy king, died early on. We don't exactly know what happened, but it was got a cracked skull, so either he had an accident or somebody killed him. We know that because what they do with these mummies, which I should probably give that a shout out. That's what they did with their dead in ancient Egypt. Is that we talk about the afterlife, but bottom line is that all of the pharaohs were pretty much guaranteed passage into the afterlife. That was accepted. And so when they buried their kings and queens, they mummified them. That is, that they presented them, they treated them in a way that was meant to preserve their bodies. And they were wrapped up and they were encased in airtight coffins. They were buried deep inside a tomb, and inside with them were all of the artifacts, or all of the tools they may need for an afterlife. And so with Tutankhamun, we know about this because this was recently uncovered in the early 1920s. A guy named Howard Carter went and found this, and it set off interest in ancient Egyptian culture. Like, it was amazing. Anyway, bottom line is that they found all kinds of things. We think that the seated scribe that we saw there, that was probably done so that a king would have somebody to write notes for him in the afterlife. And so sometimes they buried people, sometimes they buried statues of people that could serve them in the afterlife. They buried with them a lot of food, a lot of money, a lot of gold and treasure, tools, sometimes animals to pull their chariots, which were also buried with them. Everything they could possibly need in the afterlife. Well, I mentioned Howard Carter a moment ago. He was an Egyptologist and guy from Britain, and he was digging around in the early 1920s. And he found the tomb of Tutankhamun. And it was remarkably well preserved. A lot of the other tombs had been discovered over time, but most of them had been plundered. Grave robbers would come in, and especially think about it. They're going to bury the pharaoh with a lot of gold and other valuable stuff. That is a prime target for grave robbers. And so you saw that in the diagram of the pyramids, thieves' tunnels. And so Tutankhamun was a boy king. We know he was the son of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, and he wasn't in power very long because he died young. And so there wasn't a whole lot of records on him. And this discovery was quite remarkable because they found somebody they didn't really have any idea who it was at first. And so with that, this is a part of what was in his tomb. A chest full of valuables. It's painted. This is, as they say, fit for a king. It's made of wood, and it's very old. Wood usually does not last that long, but it just points to the idea that this tomb had been perfectly sealed. And gotta go back because I'm missing something here. So I wanted to show you this. Here's the innermost coffin of King Tut. Here it is. Akhenaten and Nefertiti with their 3 daughters. So we know that King Tut was not the only child. He's had 3 sisters. And we know this is Akhenaten. In part, we got the body shape, we got the royal pharaonic headdress. We know this is Nefertiti. Her. That's her. And this is kind of an interesting relief sculpture, in part because it shows the pharaoh and his wife playing with children. We haven't seen anything like that before this time. Usually the pharaoh is like very stern, very rigid, very commanding, very much a leader, very much either at war, killing lions, not playing with the kids. That's really kind of much more human than we'd ever seen before. That's kind of what makes Akhenaten, really, really different. The other thing is that he believed in the sun god. And that's why we see this sun with the rays coming down. And that is a change. Because before this time, the pharaohs themselves were the gods. And he said, no, there's the sun is what we should worship. And so anyway, a lot of what is going on here points to that idea. And so before I let you go, I wanted to ask you about quiz 1. I have a few of them in. You guys gonna finish them up tonight? Do you guys have any questions for me? And they're not due until midnight, so that's all fine. There's no points or anything involved. But I left that due date after this meeting so that if you had questions, I'd be here to talk. At midnight, 11:59.
Okay.
Tonight or tomorrow midnight?
Wait, I might have it backwards. Let me take a look. And whatever I have on there is what it is. And it's, oh, well, due tomorrow. That one's due. Yeah, tomorrow. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I remember what it was. Why I'm confused. We missed yesterday. It's Tuesday, not Monday. So yeah, tomorrow, 11:59. Got that? Well, then. I'll see you on, what is today? See you on Thursday.
My road change from the highway to.
Yeah. Did you miss any? Oh, I know what it is. I was taking the attendance here. I hadn't entered it yet
Okay, okay,
on there. I was writing it all down, but I didn't put it on.
gotcha.
So it'll go back.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
For my honors contract, I was wondering if I would be able to look more into like how certain diseases affected the artwork and like art, like the artwork and like,
Diseases.
yeah, like I noticed during the medieval one, I think it was chapter 14, it talked about the Black Plague and kind of how it affected like religion and stuff like that, but is that something I could look more into?
Yeah, as long as you keep it into the medieval.
Okay.
That would be good. And so did you get your contract yet? Did you get that?
I have it on campus. I just don't have it like wrote up yet or anything. I wanted to do
Oh,
that first.
that's a
to make
good
sure.
subject, yeah. And there's a thing, I forgot what it was on Netflix or something. There was actually a hoax that that somebody from like University of North Carolina or somebody